Happy trade deadline day, baseball fans, and welcome to Diamond Kings, the YouTube show covering baseball coast to coast. Today's special episode is at the trade deadline. We're talking about all the trades done, not just the ones today right before the deadline, but we had several this week, some really big names moving. We're talking David Price, Cole Hamels, Carlos Gomez, Yoenis Cespedes. All will be wearing different hats this weekend. It's kind of a new, refreshing moment for those teams that are in the pennant race, and then some giving you prospects for those teams that are declaring themselves out of it. We'll break all that down. My name is David Whitlock from Houston, Texas, and joining me, as always, are my co-hosts. Let's start with Michael Prosser from Florence, South Carolina. How are you, Michael?
Fat and sassy minus the fat and sassy, so I don't know what that makes me, but.
Right. Great to have you back. We missed you the last couple weeks. Also joining us is a regular, Kelvin LaPierre from Rockport, New York. How are you, Kelvin?
Good, good. Enjoying the weather, enjoying some baseball up here in good old upstate New York.
Absolutely. I was just in Cooperstown last weekend. We'll save that for the Sunday show. And joining us is a newcomer also from Houston, Texas, our new man, Matthew Bartlett. How are you today, Matthew?
I'm doing great. Staying inside. It was 100 around here. We're not in New York.
You got that right. I did the same thing.
We had hundreds earlier in the week.
It was 102 degrees, according
We've
to
been
my
stuck at 100 all year.
Welcome to baseball in the summer. It is hot. Well, let's get right into it. We don't want to waste any time because we want to break down as many deals as possible. The first subject I thought we would talk about is a little bit of action in the American League East, where you have the Yankees that have a 5 or 6 game lead on the field. You have a very, very active Toronto Blue Jays team, a mildly active Orioles team, not much action out of the the Tampa Bay Rays or the Red Sox, who are out of it. So let's start with what the Yankees did and what the Blue Jays did. The Blue Jays, of course, getting David Price and a big deal, and then, of course, Troy Tulowitzki earlier in the week, probably the best all-around player when he's healthy in this trade deadline. So we'll start with Kelvin since he's out in New York and knows the Yankees' posture. What do you think about these deals? Is this going to change anything in the American League East? Is this all or nothing for the Blue Jays? First playoffs since 1992. What do you think?
Well, if you look at what the Blue Jays did, obviously they're probably the number 2 winners, possibly even number 1 in the whole deadline deal going on. This happened all week. The David Price trade was the biggest name besides Troy Tulowitzki that they could have brought in. The Tulo deal is probably the best deal. David Price is probably a rental. He's not probably going to re-sign in Toronto. He's more of a let's go where the money is. It's your Toronto Blue Jays spent money 1 year, shipped it all out, seems like now, just like Miami did a couple years ago. Troy Tulowitzki, though, he's under contract till 2020. It's a guy who's a proven shortstop when he's healthy to win ball games. Look what he did the first night he's in a Toronto Blue Jays uniform. 2 doubles, a home run, and 4 RBIs and 4 runs scored. I mean, that's nothing to take for granted. That's what Toronto just got. The Yankees should be scared because they didn't add the pitching that they needed. But Cashman said we weren't going to do anything. I'm not surprised we didn't do anything. We went out, we got a Korean baseball player. Okay, what's he going to do? I never heard of the guy. Never heard of the team he came from. But they got a comfortable lead. The Yankees had to play Toronto 13 more times in the second half, and 4 of those starts will be against David Price, who this year the Yankees have hit hard, averaging 7 runs a game against David Price. The 3 games they played him against Detroit. So if you're Toronto, you're looking at Troy Tulowitzki to add more pop to that lineup, which he did and has so far. David Price is coming in to help a pitching staff that hasn't done much. Second worst, they give up just as many runs as they score. So it's not. I'm not too concerned about their pitching staff. It's their offense that has the potential to put up 10 runs a game I'm more worried about.
Yeah, no, I think it was a good deal for the Blue Jays. They keep making these big moves and bringing in these big names, like they did a few years ago, and it hadn't worked out. But if you look up and down their lineup, it just looks like, the most fearsome lineup in baseball. And if they have to play in a wild card game, you think of having to face a David Price with that lineup. They talked about that on MLB Network. They might be the scariest team in a one-game playoff, or i.e. a wild card game. Matthew, so what do you think about the deals that there for the Yankees and Blue Jays, or did anything else in the AL East catch your eye?
Well, I just think that there's not really many people in Toronto's lineup that I want to pitch around. Their lineup is loaded, and you bring in Tulo, and he came in and right off the bat hit another home run. And I think the offensive firepower of Toronto is something that if they can hang around and pull into the playoffs, they might be able to surprise some people. They don't have the pitching depth, I think, to go all the way. But, if you score 7-8 runs a game, you might not need to have the depth. You might just need to get lucky. And I think Toronto's a team that could surprise. I certainly didn't expect them to make as many moves as they did, and clearly management is all in on this season. Like he was saying, I don't think Price sticks around after this year, but they have control for Tulo for a couple more years, and if they just continue to keep piecing this rotation together, they might be able to make a run.
Yeah, it does seem to be a Jekyll and Hyde rotation. They've had some really, really good outings. You've got a guy like Mark Burley in that rotation who has won World Series before. He's pitched perfect games. He can dominate a game, take control in a non-dominant fashion. He doesn't strike out 12 guys a game, but he'll get you through a game in about 2 hours, 12 minutes. And also you look up and you got 4 scattered hits. And then the Yankees were a little quiet. I thought they would get a pitcher, especially I think it was Pineda that went on the DL. But I think they've proven so far they're the best team. Michael, what do you think about the Blue Jays' big deals to Tulowitzki, Price, and whether the teams like the Blue Jays or Royals can catch up to them?
Oh, I thought that the Blue Jays were fantastic. I mean, I love this boom or bust mentality. I mean, let's not forget they also picked up Mark Lowe from the Mariners.
Right.
Added that depth. Yeah, they're obviously they're one of the worst bullpens in baseball, but let's face it, nobody's worse than these guys. So. That we'll get to that in a minute, though. But yeah, I love this. I thought that if anybody was going to make a move, though, I really thought that it was going to be the Baltimore Orioles. There was a lot of talk in the work about how we're going to pull off this massive trade, and you get Geraldo Parra. Ooh, wow. Yeah, let me just go to Vegas right now and place my bet for the Orioles in the World Series. Yeah, you dumped Tommy Hunter's contract. That's great and everything, but Geraldo Parra is going to be your savior in the corners when you guys have not had corner outfielding all season ever since you let go of Nick Markakis, who subsequently staying away in Atlanta, but that's okay. Love the guy, good guy, great guy. Only hit 1 home run, but that's beside the point. He didn't, Anywho, I love this Blue Jays lineup right now. My thing is, David Price is going to be a free agent, but their mentality probably is this: hey, we make a good enough run, we impress this guy, we've got a guy that we can build around like Troy Tulowitzki, maybe, just maybe, David Price, who is, by the way, 7-0 in the Rogers Center all time. If I were David Price, if the Toronto Blue Jays tried to shell out some money to me in a place like that where I'm, undefeated with like a sub-2 ERA, I'd want to stay there.
Yeah, I agree. It'll be interesting. We don't want to get into too much of the free agent looking ahead yet, but of course teams like the Yankees will bid a lot of money. Even teams like the Dodgers just can't get enough pitching. And I'll just say that I think he'll come to the Astros because his dog is named Astro, and that's well known around here. And so Price for the Astros in 2016. Speaking of Astros, they were a very, very active team. Again, not so much today on the trade deadline day, but they got Scott Kazmir late last week, and then they added Carlos Gomez and Mike Fiers today. So there's some excitement around here. We're definitely, the future is now. There was this whole thing about the Astros rebuilding maybe for 2016, 2017. Clearly the way the AL West is shaken up, it's there for the taking. So we'll start with Matthew this time here, of course, with me in Houston. What did you think about the Astros moves? Do you think they did enough? Should they have done more, or did they give up even too much to get a guy like Gomez and Fiers?
Well, David, you say the future is now, and you look at this Astros lineup, and you'd like to see them added a more consistent bat at first base, and maybe it's a shame they missed out on the Kimbrel deal. But if you look at this team was still supposed to be around the 90, 95 loss mark this season. They weren't supposed to come on. They weren't supposed to be a threat to make the playoffs, and here they are. So if you look at a guy like Carlos Gomez, who can add to their depth in the outfield, they got Jake Marisnick in center field right now, but he hasn't been able to hit as consistently as Gomez has. So I think with the addition of Scott Kazmir, who has an ERA under .3 for the month of July, can you believe 0.3? He's allowed 1 earned run in a month. So with those pieces, I think the Astros are comfortable with where they are, knowing that they didn't have to sell the farm. they didn't have to go out, put all their hats in a rental. But this is a team that not only has a shot for this year, but Gomez is under control for next year, and Casimir is a local guy, so he might stick around. This is a team that has a legitimate World Series hopes for the next 2-3 years. Their window is here.
Yeah, I think that's the key. The window presented itself earlier than usual, and it's been great. Of course, we enjoy going to games. Well, welcome Lorenzo from Marietta, California, joining us. We're on the fly here, so we'll have people coming in and out. How are you today, Lorenzo?
Doing great. It's a great day here. Exciting day. Trade deadlines. Good time to be on the show.
All right. Well, we'll get to you in a minute. We're talking right now, of course, about the AL West and the Houston Astros acquisition. You heard some of what Matt replied to. We'll get to, of course, Lorenzo being an Angels guy. We'll get to his response and thoughts in a minute. Let's go to Michael next. What do you think about what the Astros did? Again, are they selling too much of the future? Is the future now for several years? You never know. What do you think about it?
Well, I mean, I feel like the future is now for them because they've already started to bring up all these, talented prospects. Obviously, Carlos Correa got the call up this year. Springer, of course, from last year, all, making the big splash. But I actually want to touch on Lorenzo's Angels for a second. I don't think, again, like the Orioles, I don't think enough moves. I mean, give me depth guys like, David DeJesus, but I don't ever remember David DeJesus winning anybody World Series. Swept in Houston. You needed to make a bigger splash than that. Shane Victorino's injury prone. Yeah, he's a rah-rah type of guy, and I guess that's what the Angels need right now. But I don't know. I didn't feel like they made, I don't want to say a major splash, but there were guys out there like a Justin Upton that definitely could have helped. I mean, San Diego was basically just giving people away, it seems like. It just didn't seem like enough.
Yeah, it's interesting. San Diego seemed to be in a sell position, and they didn't do anything. So
no, they really didn't, and that confused me.
Yeah. Lorenzo, we'll have to go to you now. What do you think about the Angels' moves earlier in the week? They obviously needed some outfield depth, and they got it. No big names that acquired. I tried to start a rumor today that they were trying to trade for Josh Hamilton. That didn't work out. Wait, what do you think about the Angels' moves?
That's bad, Dave.
And or the Astros' response?
Well, I just heard the last portion of your question, so let me talk about the Angels right quick.
Sure.
They did get a quality player in David Murphy. Actually,
right,
he's not a very quality player. Victorino and DeJesus, they're not guys that you're going to build around. It's a step up from C.J. Cron and from Matt Joyce, yes. Matt Joyce, he'll be designated for assignment relatively quickly. He's just not performing this season. But the Angels did need to make a trade, need to make some move. But the ones they did, I agree with him. He's not a good trade, nothing special. And we're going to be hurting this season. It's going to be bad. Astros look really strong, and after getting swept, and now that C.J. Wilson's going to be on the DL, they're in trouble. They definitely need some help. And you got to remember, too, you have until August 31st. You still do the non-waiver trade deadline, which could happen, which could get upped in, maybe even Matt Kemp over to the Angels. I still think the Padres will make some changes in the future.
Yeah, it would be interesting to watch, of course, the post non-waiver deadline, because there are deals that go through. Sometimes it's higher price guys. They're going to pay a little bit more of their salary. But, desperate times call for desperate measures. I think the Padres will be out of it here. They're already out of it now. They just don't realize it. But in a couple weeks, they'll be even farther out. And maybe trying to put some guys on waivers, and you can still deal with somebody. Whoever's the first to claim them, you can try to unload them for them. So, Kelvin, you've been patient. What do you think about the AL West? Did the Astros make a big enough move not only to win the West, but maybe just to get into the second, third round of the playoffs? What about the Angels, who had the best record in the American League last year? How does this might shape up as far as from the Yankees' perspective or anything?
Well, a couple weeks ago, we were talking about how Houston was falling apart, not hitting the ball. Now all of a sudden they're hitting the ball. They just sweep the Angels to take control of the AL West again. I predicted them to win the AL West. Going back, I predicted that to happen. I didn't see them continuing to play that bad, and they've come out of it. Their bats have come alive. Altuve's hitting the ball better. You're going to get, who is it, Carter that went on the DL is going to come back in a couple weeks. Correa, playing 45 games at shortstop, is the #1 home run hitting shortstop in that span, and I think he's actually the leader in shortstop home runs in a 42 game span with 10.
For the American League, yeah.
He's played. He's up there. The Angels didn't do much, especially when you just put C.J. Wilson on the DL today. He's on the 15-day DL. You recall a AAA pitcher who, when he's been in there, hasn't been consistent. It's a spot miss, hit or miss guy. But adding Gomes to the Houston lineup in the outfield, I mean, right there, that I think locks it up. Houston's pitching depth is a little bit deeper than the LA Angels is. I predicted that this would happen. Beginning of the year, I said Houston would not be a last-place team in that division. I said it would be Texas. I didn't predict them to win it at the beginning, but at the middle of the year, I predicted Houston to win it, and I still am going to go that way. Houston's going to win this division by 4 games. LA is going to be in that second wild card spot. So we'll just go from there. I mean, LA is not a bad team. Could they get hot? They got Albert Pujols. Mike Trout's iffy right now with that quad strain in his leg. He's got to get healthy. He played last night. They lost again last night, though. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think Trout was a wrist problem, I think. He had a diving catch on Sunday and messed up his wrist. And certainly the first 2 games against Houston, he was missing that lineup. I got to go to the game on Tuesday, and just looking up and down their lineup, I mean, you got past Pujols, and there was about 3 or 4 guys that were, 230, 220, 198 type batting averages. Which is, actually, the Astros aren't that much better at the bottom of their lineup, but they do have a little bit more pop at the top, like we talked about Altuve, for instance, as well as Correa, are both hitting around 300. And you've got some guys like Preston Tucker. Chris Carter is healthy. I think you were talking about George Springer, who's going to be out.
Yeah, Springer, yeah.
Astros just got Jed Lowry back last night, playing some third base. They're moving Valbuena from third to first, trying him out there. So still some moving parts. But adding Gomez, I think, to the top of the lineup, if he can perform, he's been banged up this year. His power numbers and speed haven't been there like they have in his 2 All-Star seasons. So we'll see how it goes. Optimism here for sure.
Hey, Dave, right quick.
Yeah.
We totally just forgot to talk about your buddies down in Arlington. I mean, landing Cole Hamels, did anybody just forget that they did that? And then not only that, but they have him for next year. This is a team that potentially in free agency, if they go out, now that they have Cole Hamels, you still have Yovani Gallardo. Could they bring in, either a number 2 guy or maybe a solid number 3 and actually build that pitching staff? Because, I mean, people, Cole Hamels is one of those guys, he's potentially could eventually be an ace. He hasn't really been able to have that ace potential anymore because of his days in Philly. But now you get him around a team that actually is, decently, to good. People might want to come down there and play with Cole Hamels. I mean, there's no sales tax in Texas apparently or something like that, which is why all the athletes are going to Texas. I mean, hey, you never know. You may be able to build around Cole Hamels here. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's possible.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit more because the Rangers look like they might be sellers and buyers at the same time. Of course, getting Hamels, presumably a move for next year when they'll get Yu Darvish back, when they'll get Derek Collins for the full season. Potentially guys like Jerks and Profar to hit. Plus, their young players are still hitting well. Prince Fielder, Beltre will be around. So let's couch that in terms of them and the Detroit Tigers, who also are only a couple games out of the wild card, but are sitting there selling off. They're one of their best hitters and one of their best pitchers, of course, is David Price. So what are the Tigers doing? Do they rebuild more quickly? They've got some veterans like Victor Martinez and Miguel Cabrera. And I know, Kelvin, you're a big Cespedes fan. What do you think about them unloading him? Is that a good move? They got a couple guys in return. But what do you think about the Tigers' prospects as well as what the Rangers did today?
Well, the Rangers obviously are my top 5 winners just because of the Cole Hamels signing and what this means going forward for next season. It's not a this-year move, and they knew that when they went to go get him, which is why I didn't bring them up yet, Michael, because they were in my top 5 winners of this thing going through. Because you have Cole Hamels next year, you have a Yu Darvish, you have a Derek Holland all coming back. That's a top 3 starting rotation right there, just with those 3 names alone. If Yu Darvish comes back to the same player he was before the injury, then you're looking at a powerful top 2 lineup. I mean, You go face Hugh Darvish, and then you're going to face a Cole Hamels. That's a potent one too. In any series, you're going to go face. You find that third starter, which you talked about. David Price is a free agent come the end of the year. Does he go to Texas and play for the Rangers and not the Astros? Where Dave, I know you guys want him because of his dog Astro.
Right.
As far as it goes with Detroit trading Cespedes, I mean, once you knew David Price got traded, you knew they were going to unload some more money and dump Cespedes off their contract. They still have Verlander. They're only 2.5 games out. Is the AL a tough wild card to get into right now, being so tight? No. Could they do it? Yes. Are they going to make a deep run without a David Price and a Cespedes? No, they know that. I think they realize that after this weekend, that they weren't going to go very far, even if they do make that wild card and win that game. They're not going to make that deep run. They don't have the depth the Royals did last year going into this. So did they do the right thing? Yeah, the Mets needed a outfielder, a power-hitting outfielder. They went and got him. Welcome to New York, big guy. He's going to stay in New York. He's going to love it. Is it going to be the Mets? Maybe, maybe not. Does he go jump ship and go to the Bronx? Maybe. Carlos Beltran's coming off the books next year, so here you go. Cespedes, let's go. Bring your money.
Sounds good. Yeah, that was the big part of the Cespedes thing, was he was going to be on the market for a very, very high price next season. So the Tigers almost had to make that move. Let's go to Matthew now. What do you think about our rival, the Rangers, making that move? Are we scared for next year, or even scared this year?
Well, the thing about the Rangers, and that's something that's been puzzling me this season, is even with the addition of Cole Hamels and Darvish up at the top, you mentioned, Kellen, that's a good 1-2 punch, but those are also two of the guys. I mean, before Hamels goes out and throws the no-hitter, his stock is way down, and he's getting battered around in the month of July up to the trade deadline. And Darvish is one to go from a 12-strikeout game to getting through the next one in 3 innings with 6 runs. So it's a lineup that is it's formidable. It's got some good names, but do they have the staying power? And is Cole Hamels in 3 years going to be as good as the Cole Hamels he has now, or are the Rangers going to be selling a year or two from now? I'm not so sure. So when you stack up the Rangers and the Astros rotations against each other, I think you got to go with the youth that the Astros have coming through the system and the all-star starter, Dallas Keuchel. I think it's an edge, and the Astros have held over the lead for the Rangers this season. They're going to win the Silver Boot again. For what that's worth, I think this is going to continue to be a bit of a rivalry, but I think the Astros are going to have the upper hand.
Yeah, I agree. It'll be interesting. Guys like Adrian Beltre are not getting any younger. While the Astros have some young pitchers like Lance McCullers Jr., like Vincent Velasquez, that they're limiting a little bit this year. They're going to grow into bigger roles down the way. So Lorenzo, you've been patient. What do you think about our joint rivals in the AL West, the Rangers, as well as what the heck the Tigers are doing? Are the Tigers making the right moves? Do they have just held on to their talent or unloaded more?
2.5 games is a lot to make up, especially this late in the season. They had to make the move. They weren't going to sign Price. They weren't going to sign Cespedes, so it's a good deal for them overall. Victor Martinez, he's good. Still has a big salary there, so that's another person that might get rid of as well. Good move on the Tigers' part. They knew they weren't going anywhere. The Mets are very impressive. They have to make a move at some point. Getting Cespedes is huge. And I just felt bad for Wilmer Flores after he started crying on the field. I felt for the guy. I know that feeling. I just seen him out there wearing his emotions on his sleeve. It's just a sad day. But good to see that he's still there, though.
Yeah, that was quite the bizarre scene. Of course, in the Twitterverse today, players find out they're traded from that before their manager even knows. And, of course, then it all fell through, and then a bunch of other dominoes fell differently. But, that's the days. Anytime a player's pulled from a game or he's sit out of the lineup, it's like, oh, he's been traded. It's going to happen, but not always the case. Well, you mentioned the Mets. Let's go briefly through the National League, some of the happenings. Not a lot of action. Of course, the Nationals picked up Papelbon, a closer that they needed. The Mets got Yoenis Cespedes, definitely a bat. They got a couple other bats earlier in the week. Out on the West Coast, you have the Dodgers that picked up a couple starting pitchers, which they definitely needed some depth. And then in the Central, you had the Cardinals pretty much staying pat, and then the Pirates making a couple small moves. So talk about any of those or all of those, but try to be brief so we can get through this and get to the winners and losers segment. We'll start with Michael. What do you think about the National League? I know you're an expert on the East. The Braves didn't make a lot of moves, but could somebody have made more of a move than they actually did?
Well, I mean, it's kind of sad to see a young guy like Alex Wood go, but apparently Hector Correa is this damn good, so we'll see what happens. I'm all for this fire sale that John Hart's been going through. I said it before. I'll say it again. The guy is a baseball genius, and, he's like Harvey Dent. I believe in Harvey Dent. I believe in John Hart. He's getting rid of all these horrible contracts that we've had. Luis Avalon was awful. Jim Johnson was awful. Bronson Arroyo. Didn't even remember him being on the staff because he's been injured for so long. Gone. Get out of here. No, I want to talk about two names right now. Mike Leake going to San Francisco. There has not been a hotter pitcher in the month of July than Mike Leake. And you put him with, I think it's Chris Heston, the guy who's quietly winning 11 games in San Francisco. It's probably going to be the end of the line for Tim Hudson, which is a very sad thing. Huddy, I love you. I miss you, buddy. But I want to talk about Mike Leake going there because that's one of those sneaky moves that San Francisco always makes at the trade deadline that pushes them over top, and I feel like that's going to this year. I also want to talk about the Dodgers getting Jose Tabata. They moved Michael Morse. Somehow or another, you conned the Pittsburgh Pirates into taking Michael Morse for Jose Tabata. I mean, Tabata's one of those guys that he's been around for a while. You just didn't realize it. Good hitting, solid contact, bat on ball outfielder. That did the Dodgers really need him? I mean, it was one of those that you've already got, you've got this plethora of outfielders, and you bring in another guy. But I mean, you got to do what you got to do. I applaud it, but I really thought that San Francisco sneakily came out and just nailed everything to the wall. Like, it was like that was it. The Mike Leake move was it's going to be sneaky good.
And I think I'll just tag in on there. I think when you look at the names that were out there, and everyone was talking about how many all-star pitchers the Dodgers were going to add with Hamels or Cueto or Price, they didn't get any of them. And you look at the upgrade that San Francisco make, and I think not only do they have a chance to make the playoffs as a wild card, they could pitch past the Dodgers.
Yeah, they're only about a half game out right now behind the Dodgers, and then you throw in
they're getting healthy too. San Francisco is getting healthy at the right time.
You throw in the fact that whoever's out of that is then in the wild card race with the teams like the Cubs and Pirates, and this could be a very, very fun race to watch. Unfortunately, after you drop off after the Cubs, it's a little bit of ways. There's the Mets kind of hanging in there, but anyway, it's going to be a good race in the NL. We'll go to Kelvin next. What do you think about the National League moves, particularly in the West, East? Did any team make a strong enough move to really put themselves over the top, like Michael's talking about?
Can't necessarily say over the top, but the Dodgers improved their pitching staff again by going and getting a Matt Latos from Miami. Matt Latos is pitching well his last 9 starts. He's had 1 bad start out of the last 9. His ERA is up to 4.4. But that's only because his first 3 starts were coming off an injury from last season, and they never told the Marlins about it. He's pitching through it. They put him on the DL. Since he's come off the DL, he's been rock solid. I have him on my fantasy team. He's going out to LA, a better ballpark to pitch in. Not that Miami's a bad ballpark to pitch in, but LA's nicer. The view's better. The team is in a race to be a contender. Does this put them over the top? Not necessarily, because like you guys have said, the Giants have added another piece to the puzzle, and they are getting healthy at the right time. Hunter Pence is off the DL now and playing well. You have the pitching staff pitching well. You have Bumgarner, who is going to be the ace of that staff going in. They trade away a couple pieces that they weren't going to use anyway. Timmy, I'm sorry for your Atlanta Braves there, Michael. Timmy Hudson pitched for my Hornell Dodgers. Back in the day when he was starting out of college, he was pitching for the Hornell Dodgers. Great guy, nice guy. Sad to see him probably be done, but 40 years old, that's about average for a pitcher. You're done. The only exception is Bartolo Colon, but we all know his steroid use, so we know what that is. Another team that shocked me was the Nationals going out and getting Papelbon. I think that's a mistake, bringing a guy like that into your bullpen. Yes, he's a shutdown guy when it comes to closing, but He's a guy in the locker room that teammates don't like around, and it seems with what they have going on in Washington, that's not a guy I'd bring into that clubhouse. It's just not something I'm a fan of. That's why Boston traded him to Philly. Well, let him go to Philly, even though he went after the money, and that's why Philly said, here you go, you want out, here you go, we don't want you anyway. And the Phillies have been playing a little bit better since he's been gone.
It's good observations around. Lorenzo, what do you think about the NL moves? Did anything catch your eye?
Okay, I was only able to hear bits and pieces of it, but the team that I'm most disappointed in is the Chicago Cubs. The Cubs are only 2 games out, and their biggest trade deadline acquisition was Dan Herron. And I don't know if you guys have seen much of Dan Herron, but I have. When he was with the Angels, when he was with the Dodgers, when he was with the Marlins, he's not a good starting pitcher. At best, he's a number 4, maybe a number 5. And the fact that that's the Cubs' biggest acquisition, they could have done so much more. 2 games out, they still get in it. They haven't been in the playoffs in probably 7, 8 years at least. This could have been the year to get the fans going after the renovations for the ballpark and the new players they have in there. It's could have been a great time to make a move. They saw firsthand how good Cole Hamels is, but yet they didn't pull the trigger on that one either. Just really disappointed with the Cubs. I thought they were going to do something better for once.
Yeah, they had an opportunity to try to stock up that bullpen. Of course, they got one arm in the rotation. They didn't seem to want to do a lot with their lineup because they have so many young tech players they're moving around, but even then they've got some things to improve. Matthew, you touched a little bit on some of the National League happenings. I'll let you finish up any thoughts there, and then you can be first up to go into just overall thoughts. Give me your top winners and losers from the trade deadlines, and that'll be the question for everybody. Top 2 or 3 teams you thought did well, top 2 or 3 teams, as Lorenzo said, with the Cubs that didn't do as well. So Matthew, up first.
I'll go ahead and second the Papelbon point. Drew Soren's comments upon hearing that he was coming to the team on, I've already said all I'm going to say to management. That just starts a cancer, and I know chemistry is something that you can't just put a win-loss total on, but that's something that when you look at a team like Washington that's going to have to go through the Dodgers, is going to have to go through maybe San Francisco, St. Louis to get to the World Series. St. Louis in particular, that's a team that's been together. It has a good winning culture, and I don't know if that's really the answer that they want to stick with, but they've hung their hat on it, so we'll see. And as far as my winner or losers, a name that we haven't brought up because they weren't mentioned in a lot of the flurries of moves and no moves today is the Kansas City Royals. I think they did something for a smaller market club that was not really expected. They went out and they got Johnny Cueto. Realistically, with some of the contracts that are coming due for them, this might be the end of their window, at least in the short run, and they needed an ace, and they got him. So I think just not sitting back and watching and going out and getting Cueto, even though it was just the one move, they're a pretty well-set team. I mean, they're in first place in their division. They have that locked down. They're not going to have a problem getting to the playoffs. So I think they're my number 1. Beyond that, I think the Astros are number 2 with what they paid for Scott Kazmir and his 2 straight shutout starts for the Astros. That's just dynamic. It's going to be a game changer, definitely for Houston. And then I think you have to add Toronto to that list, at least in the short term. They're a winner. Is all the money they took on from Tulo going to be worth it in the long run? If they make the playoffs this year, it will be. Toronto has the longest playoff drought of any team in the 4 professional sports, the big ones, and not just in baseball. And so I think that's something in their management with their GM coming to the end of his tenure that they're ready to make a push this year. So it's got to be the year. Beyond that, you got a couple other names of teams that did just enough. I think the Giants getting Leak is going to turn out well, and then that's the totality of my winners. I think a lot of other teams made some improvements, but those would be my top 4. And then I think my loser, and everybody's going to probably hit on this, is the San Diego Padres. I heard 3 or 4 rumors last night and this afternoon of blockbuster deals with the Cubs and the Mets and the Astros of how they were going to unload all of these arms and all this money and nothing. I think you got to scratch your head out with that. With as far as they are back, they're 8 games back in the division, and wild card is not going to be obtainable for them, I don't think. So, you got to scratch your head and ask the question to the management. You shelled out all that money in the off season, and then you didn't pull the trigger when it came time to reload. I think they're going to be in a world of hurt come next year.
Yeah, they seem content to let Upton go for a draft pick. That was even said today, like, well, we'll just take our first-round draft pick when he goes. Lorenzo, what do you think about winners and losers so far, or what you saw at the trade deadline? Who are your big on either side, big teams on either side?
I don't mean to kill the city of Chicago, but the other losers have to be the White Sox. Look at the White Sox, and the fact that they didn't trade Samardzija, they could have gotten a decent return on him. Their team is not going anywhere. They haven't been going anywhere in a while. They're a team that just seems to flounder in the AL Central. They're not really good enough to compete, but yet they're not bad enough to get good draft picks. And they're struggling. The other person I thought they were going to trade was Giovanni Soto. Giovanni Soto, he's been around for a while. He's another one of those guys. He's been around forever, but he's still a relatively good catcher. And there's teams that would want him. And the fact that they held on to him doesn't make sense to me. There's a lot of players and potential with the White Sox that they just didn't do. And maybe just the city of Chicago is not ready for another championship. They had the Blackhawks, and I guess maybe they already hit their quota for championships. But as of now, there's really nothing else they can do. Real disappointed with both teams in Chicago.
And what about our winners? Who did you think was won the day?
You know what? There's a lot of teams that look really well. I like what the Mets did. The way that the Mets went after it with Cespedes, they show that they're willing to deal. They want to make a move. Seeing that the Yankees are in first place again, even though they weren't expected to be there this year, maybe that put more pressure on the Mets to actually make a move instead of just standing pat like they've done in the past. As we know, they are doing trades that don't make sense. They make sense in the short term, not in the long term. For example, the Scott Kazmir, Victor Zambrano trade from a few years ago. That trade still it killed them for a couple of years. And hopefully, they make some good trades and they'll work out well. But big fan of what the Mets did this season.
Yeah, they were right, because that Cespedes deal came right at the end, and before that, they were starting to get really panned. Like, boy, if they don't really get a bat out of this, they really missed an opportunity. But they got the bat that they needed. Kelvin, what do you think about the winners and losers? Of all the teams we talked about, obviously the Padres are on the losing side. Some other teams made big deals. Who do you think won the day, and who do you think lost the day?
Well, winners for the whole trade deadline, number one, Kansas City adding pitching depth to that rotation with a Johnny Cueto, then going out and getting a Ben Zobrist to come in and play in that lineup. Then you go number two, you got to look at finally the Toronto Blue Jays making a splash at the deadline. It seems like they always strike it in free agency, but they leave it up at the deadline and put up a dud. This year they go out and get David Price and Troy Tulowitzki to add to that lineup. That's already scary. They help their pitching staff out by getting a David Price veteran leadership who's been to a World Series with a Mark Burley and an R.A. Dickey who's performed well in July. Then you go to number three is the Houston Astros, in my opinion. That's number three, going out and getting a Scott Kazmir. And then you add all to that pitching staff, who's already a pretty good pitching staff. Number four, like it or not, I'm going to put Minnesota in this list. Just going out and getting a Jepson for that bullpen from Tampa Bay and not having to give up anything really to get them but a couple prospects. They're a team that's a surprise team. I'm not surprised that they didn't make that big splash because of the market they're in. Another surprise team that I'm going to be surprised that made a trade was I already said the Mets, right? Said the Mets? The Mets? No, I didn't say the Mets. Mets are number 5. Just by adding Cespedes, if they didn't make a move being 2 games out in the NL East, I think that fan base would have been in a bigger uproar than they are already at ownership for not trying. They have now said to their fan base, we are in it to win it this year. We have a young pitching staff who has proven all year that they can keep us in almost any ball game when they pitch to their potential. And now you go out and get that outfield bat that they needed for power with Cespedes going to Citi Field. Citi Field is just like Yankee Stadium. It's got the short porch. Cespedes is a left-handed hitter. Here you go. Go hit the ball out of the ballpark in Citi Field. Losers, San Diego Padres. I get what their GM's thinking. Look, we're 7.5 games out, the second wild card spot. We're not winning our division. We went out, we spent this money. We have 4 of those players that were on trade talks under contract through next year. So can you say they're really losers if they trade them all next year and get prospects out of it? No, you can't. But you're going to put them in there because of what was talked about all day. Big trades are coming from San Diego. Upton's going to Baltimore. Upton's going to Chicago. You have Kimball going to New York. You have Kimball going to Chicago. I mean, what happened to that? Why did they not do it? The Yankees offered their number one prospect shortstop in the Kimbrel deal, and they still turned it down, which tells me, look, their GM wasn't trading. He was just listening to see what was out there. Another loser is Chicago White Sox again. Didn't trade Samardzija. Why do you not trade a guy who's not coming back next year? 2-year ball club. Chicago Cubs, another loser. You didn't add enough to that lineup to help you get deep into the postseason. But look at what Theo Epstein said going in after signing a John Lester. We're not World Series ready. We're maybe playoff bottom level ready, but we're not a team that's going to make a deep run. And I still believe they're like the Houston Astros. They're a year away. Houston is now. Last year I said Houston was a year away. Cubs are still a year away from being that top echelon team that could be in the NL race. St. Louis is just too tough right now. Not going to happen. So those are my losers, my winners. Like it or not, the Yankees, I just had some breaking news for the Yankees come through. They are starting Cervino, and his next start will be in the big leagues. Power arm, he's got Chapman speed with his fastball. When it's on, he's 100, 101, and he's a starter. That's probably why the Yankees didn't make a move, knowing that they were bringing him up for a starting pitcher. If he pitches well the last 2 months of the season, there's your Yankees top 4. You have Pineda, Nova, Tanaka, and Cervino. Your top 4 going into any series. I'm content with that.
No Sabathia, okay. But
I don't want Sabathia anywhere near Mount.
Right. Good points. Sometimes the best acquisitions are the ones that come from your system. Michael, you've been patient. What do you think about the winners and losers?
Well, I'm going to start naming teams that nobody who really has named yet when it comes to winners. You know what? I thought the Cardinals really did win this. I mean, they go out and they get Steve Cishek earlier. You know, they bring in another arm to that bullpen. A guy, yeah, he lost his confidence in Miami, but, I mean, you know, like we had mentioned earlier, that St. Louis ball club, that St. Louis bullpen, that whole organization is a family. And I think that mentality is going to bring Cishek back up, you know, to where the guy saved like 88 games in 2 years. I mean, the fact that they just gave him away like that, that's a steal for St. Louis. And that's the beauty about St. Louis. They always seem to find those bargain guys like a San Francisco did. Brandon Moss is another guy. Mark Repchinski, who they brought back into their system. If I'm not mistaken, he was a Cardinal like 3 years ago when they won the World Series. They got him for next to nothing. So I'm going to say, like, you know, for those little moves, the Cardinals really did win that. I thought Pittsburgh going out and get Aramis Ramirez, that was, you know, just another bat in the system. That's another pretty solid move there. Try to get that guy, you know, one more for Huddy. How about one for Aramis, man? The guy goes back to where it all started for him. Hopefully it does something for him. He's always been one of those, you know, one of those guys that you appreciate what he does, even though he's not really, like, you don't talk about Aramis Ramirez like you talk about anybody else. Losing-wise, yes, San Diego. I'm going to disagree with Kelvin a little bit. I thought that Minnesota probably should have made a little bit of a bigger move than they did, even though it's a smaller market. They're only a few games back of Kansas City. That wild card race is going to start tightening up even more now, and they didn't make enough of a move to try to even get ahead. They were stagnant, but they didn't go here. Like, they needed to be here, and they were just kind of here. And I'm going to say Cincinnati also lost. Yeah, you get rid of Johnny Cueto and you get something back, but you also have Aroldis Chapman there, who probably would have garnered an amazing return. And yet he's still sitting there. He's not going to they probably won't have the money to re-sign him.
He's still under contract until next year. He's good.
Oh, well, either way, I mean, you still could have gotten, you know, a bigger return for him. And who's to say, you know, that maybe, you know, next year is the year that they move him or not. I mean, I thought it was kind of a weird deal for Cincinnati anyway. Just this being a down year. I mean, they had a couple of good teams in the past couple of years. They've been hit with injuries a lot. I think Jay Bruce has been injured as well, but Todd Frazier is destroying everything he touches. And, I mean, when it comes to another winner, yes, I'm going to include the Mets, but I'm going to include the Mets for a different reason, and mark this on camera is probably the only time I'm ever going to say something good about the New York Mets.
Marking.
Getting Tyler Clippard was a big move. Everybody's going to talk about the Yoenis Cespedes deal, but let's not forget, a few years ago, Tyler Clippard was the man in Washington. He was shutting people down. I really thought he was going to do that in Oakland, and obviously when the fire sale went on in Oakland, Clippard was obviously going to be one of those guys that was going to be moved. And you know, that's one of those deals, like, you look back and go, okay, the bullpen was good, now it got even a little, just even if it's a slight bit better, it's a little bit better now with Tyler Clippard because he's had playoff experience with Washington. He's deep in the thick of things. Good for you, Tyler. Hopefully you get paid one of these days because you really deserve it. You really do.
Great analysis, guys. We've got to wrap this up. It's been a great, busy day for baseball. Like we talked about, there'll probably be some more deals that come through in the next month. We'll still plan to have a show on Sunday like usual. We'll talk a little bit about the Hall of Fame induction since we didn't have a show last week, as well as recap some of this and any other changes. But I want to thank Kelvin, Lorenzo, Matthew, and Michael for joining us. We thank you for watching our show, and we'll see you guys next time on Diamond King.